Senator Dave Sharma was formerly Australia's ambassador to Israel. He joins me now. Dave Sharma, welcome to the programme.
Good evening.
What options do you think that Israel is weighing up now?
Well, I think clearly they will need to respond, and Prime Minister Netanyahu has made that clear. The question is, does that take the form of a response that accompanied this last barrage of Iranian missiles in April, when Israel basically hit a radar site for an anti-missile system? It was a demonstration of capability rather than intended to do damage. Or do they do something more fulsome than that? And I don't think we know the answer to that just yet. Is
there a scenario that includes the United States?
Well, I think, look, the United States was involved in this latest missile defence exercise. You know, missile interceptors fired from 2 US destroyers in the Mediterranean were responsible for that. And I think Joe Biden has made clear that the United States will continue to have Israel's back. I don't think the United States, though, wants to directly engage in aggression with Iran. I think they will defend Israel against Iranian attacks, but I think whatever Israel does, it will do by itself.
I noticed Naftali Bennett, who's actually leading Netanyahu in the polls in Israel right now, said this is a 50-year opportunity to redraw the contours of the region. What does that mean?
Well, I think what we've seen, Hezbollah has been significantly degraded through this latest military operation. Hamas is significantly weakened as a military actor. Both of those two actors, plus Iran, have done an immense amount to retard progress and normalisation in the region. They've held their own populations hostage and kept them in misery, but they've also been effectively rejectionists of any broader regional peace. And, you know, the Israel-Saudi Arabia peace negotiations, which had been reaching a point of fruition before Hamas launched this attack, was deeply concerning to Iran and all its rejectionist foes. So with those actors weakened, I think there is an opportunity to build on the Abraham Accords, build on a Israeli-Arab peace and create a more enduring settlement in the region.
So counterintuitively, a possible platform for something good rather than him meaning redraw the contours in a violent way?
I think that's exactly what Naftali Bennett meant. I think he sees a more positive future that allows Israelis and Arabs, or Jewish and Arab people, to coexist in the region, which is what Israel has always wanted since its creation in 1948.
Let me just ask you a question about Iran. There were reports that this decision was ordered by the Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, as distinct from the Iranian army, and also that the new president of Iran was only informed of the attack on Israel an hour beforehand. Does that complicate the decision that it's not the entire Iranian state?
Well, look, I think the IRGC calls the shots and the Supreme Leader calls the shots in Iran. In many respects, the president has some limited domestic authority, but he's there at the pleasure and serves at the pleasure of the Supreme Leader and the IRGC. And I think whenever Iran acts internationally, it's the IRGC involved. I mean, they were the ones that have built up Hezbollah to this formidable fighting force that it is today. These are the ones that have funded the Houthis in Yemen, that fund Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. So I think you can only think of the Iranian state as coexistent with the IRGC.
As one thing. Now, I think your colleague Simon Birmingham said this afternoon on the ABC that the IRGC should be prescribed as a terrorist organisation. Is that party policy?
Look, I think it's certainly something that we should be considering after the level of regional destabilisation they have been involved in. Yes, it's absolutely something we should be considering.
And is it something that's being discussed?
It has been discussed in the past. I haven't been involved in active conversations in the last week, but certainly there have been a number of, you know, and this is true around the world, a number of similar governments around the world who have been considering this question of whether the IRGC should be listed.
Do you think it's the right move?
I don't think it would do any harm. I think, generally speaking, we have resisted doing this in the past because Australia is one of the few Western countries that retains diplomatic relations with Iran. We retain an embassy in Tehran. But I think the utility of that diplomatic presence has been shown to be very minimal over the last few years. I mean, we had a well-known Australian academic, Kylie Moore-Gilbert, who was detained unlawfully and unjustly by the Iranian regime for a number of years. The fact that we had a diplomatic relationship with Iran did not do much to help get her out.
Now, just moving to Lebanon, Israel says its enemy in Lebanon is not the Lebanese people, but Hezbollah, which of course has been firing rockets into Israel in this particular era since October 7th or 8th. Yes. Israel has also been firing rockets at Hezbollah positions. Is it justified in a ground assault? Is its ground assault and attacks on the capital Beirut justified as self-defence?
I think they are justified. I think Israel has a right to respond to Hezbollah's continued aggression in it. And it's important it does so in a proportionate and targeted way. But all the evidence I've seen is firstly that their military strikes are directed solely against Hezbollah military targets, that they are making best endeavours to make sure the civilian population is warned in advance and asked to evacuate. And to the extent they've gone in on the ground, it seems to be quite limited and targeted operations directed at Hezbollah's military.
I think we've seen 1,000 casualties in the last couple of weeks. Now, of course, we don't know how many of those are, as it were, pure civilian casualties, how many of those may have been Hezbollah fighters. It's still a large number of people. It
is, and every civilian death is regrettable, but you have to remember, I mean, Hezbollah consciously and deliberately embeds itself, puts command infrastructure, puts missile silos in people's roofs, adjacent to schools, underneath hospitals, just as Hamas did as well. So this is the sort of warfare environment you are facing. Now, Israel should, and I believe is, taking all steps it should be taking to minimise civilian casualties. But inevitably, in a conflict like this, in a built-up urban environment with an adversary such as Hezbollah, there will be civilian casualties.
I want to talk about Australia and the impact these conflicts are having on social cohesion. First of all, about the legislation around people carrying flags at demonstrations. Is the legislation as it exists, and I think we've seen someone charged today who was, I think, carrying a flag with a Hezbollah symbol. Do you think the legislation is strong enough as it's written?
Well, my view is that prima facie it is, and this legislation, section 80.2 HA of the Criminal Code, captures the public display of Hezbollah flags, portraits of Hassan Nasrallah, and that law needs to be tested, and the way it would be tested is police make arrests and lay charges, and I think it's important that that is done. If that law is shown to be inadequate, if it doesn't capture that sort of activity, then as Peter Dutton said, the Parliament should look at altering that legislation. But I believe prima facie there is a case to answer here.
And how important are the elements of intention, the intention to incite hatred?
Well, my reading of the legislation is that if a person is likely to feel offended, insulted, humiliated or vilified in some way because of their membership of a group, so if you're a Jewish Australian, and I think almost certainly nearly all Jewish Australians, reasonable Jewish Australians, would feel all of those things if they encountered people waving Hezbollah flags, chanting praise to Hassan Nasrallah in the streets, then the intent elements of that offence are met. It's not quite a strict liability offence, but it's pretty close to it.
And what is your position on the protests? I think the police have gone to court to try and stop the protests that are planned for October the 7th. What is your view on those protests?
I don't think those protests should go ahead. I think the police are right to seek to deny them a permit to go ahead. I think it's incredibly reckless. I think the intent of the protesters has been made manifestly clear by their conduct last Sunday. I think it will only cause further social division and discord in Australia, and I don't believe the protests are in any sense well-meaning. They're designed to radicalise Australia and sow social division and import a foreign conflict here.
Dave Sharma, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.